I was supposed to be the villainous side character that everyone on the internet loved to hate, serving as nothing more than a pathetic foil for the golden couple. On the first day of prep school, I decided to rewrite the script by exposing the hero as a bastard child in front of everyone and taking down the school board. I even kicked my own mother and her son Ethan out of the house, completely flipping the script on my supposed downfall. On the first day at Northwood Academy, I realized I had been transported into a teen drama novel as the suicidal villain. My first move was to step right up to the main character and slap him twice across the face. Right there in the front row stood my cheating girlfriend Hannah, along with a massive crowd of students waiting for a scene. Standing right there on the assembly stage, I casually announced that I was just having a little fun with my illegitimate half-brother. The rush of adrenaline was incredible as I leaned back into my role as the antagonist. I already had a terrible reputation to maintain, and I was officially done being a pathetic simp for anyone. Northwood Academy was holding its monthly all-hands assembly, and the lawn was packed with students. Usually, the honor students and the troublemakers stood together on stage to receive their respective marks. Today, however, only two of us were standing up there, myself and the school's golden boy, Ethan Montgomery. The dean began reading from her clipboard, stating that James Harrison of the senior class had publicly harassed and bullied his classmate Ethan in the hallway last week. Apparently, the principal had caught me in the act. Because the incident was so disruptive, I was being publicly shamed in order to issue a formal apology to the student body. The teacher didn't even try to hide her contempt as she called my name. I stepped forward with a completely blank expression and snatched the microphone from her hand. I looked out at the sea of faces and calmly said that I had indeed humiliated my classmate Ethan in the hall last week. For that specific incident, I let the silence hang for a moment before letting a smug grin spread across my face as I told them I was incredibly satisfied with my actions. I added that I hoped he would take my words to heart and remember them for the rest of his life. The entire student body erupted into a chaotic murmur of shock. The faculty members on stage looked absolutely livid, and I took my time enjoying the way their faces twisted in anger. This was just the beginning of the show. Ethan, who had been standing behind me with the smug look of a victim finally getting justice, was now completely paralyzed with shock. I spun around suddenly and started walking toward him, causing him to stumble back in fear. He wasn't fast enough to escape. Two sharp cracks echoed across the courtyard as I slapped him twice. I calmly rubbed my stinging palms together as the sound died down. I looked down at Ethan sprawled on the ground and let my grin widen even further. I told the audience I was sorry for bullying my dear half-brother and promised to reflect on it later. Then I warned everyone that if this illegitimate son ever showed his face near me again, I would finish what I started. My voice rang out clearly through the speakers, making sure every single student heard the truth about his birth. Realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, the teacher rushed over and yanked the microphone away from me. She looked terrified that I was about to say something even more scandalous. I walked off the stage without a second glance, leaving the faculty to deal with the chaos I had created. I felt lighter than air as I strolled away from the scene. Ethan was left sitting there in total humiliation, and his big moment of being the school's martyr was officially ruined. In the original story, I was supposed to stand there like a coward and read a scripted apology for my alleged bullying. I was meant to be the villain that made Ethan look like a saintly, high-achieving victim by comparison. That moment was supposed to solidify his status as the school's golden boy, while I became the outcast. That apology would have branded me as a violent thug for the rest of my high school career. Everyone would have avoided me, and every mistake I made would have been traced back to how I treated Ethan. It didn't even matter that, in the original timeline, Ethan was usually the one instigating the drama. Was it wrong of me to tell a bastard son to stay away from my fiancée, Ava? Was it wrong to tell him to stop acting like he owned my family home? Not at all. The only mistake the original James made was being too soft on him. In this world, if you're going to be the villain, you have to be absolutely heartless. I followed the layout of the school from the memories in my head and headed toward the main entrance. I pulled out my phone and texted my driver to come pick me up immediately. When I reached the gate, a burly security guard stepped into my path with a stern expression, blocking the exit. He told me that students weren't allowed to leave campus during school hours. He was just doing his job, so I didn't want to cause a scene. Instead, I winced and grabbed my leg, putting on a performance of sudden and agonizing pain. I choked out a lie about my mother having just passed away and needing to get home. The guard was stunned and immediately stepped back, his face filled with genuine pity. He sighed and patted my shoulder, telling me that my mother was watching over me and that I should hurry home to be with my family. I could feel his gaze on my back as I walked away, full of sympathy for my fake loss. Once I was around the corner, I checked the iMessage from my driver and saw that he was stuck in heavy traffic. He was going to be at least 20 minutes late, so I had some time to kill. I scanned the row of shops along the street, passing by the cafes and small delis until I spotted a local grill shack. The place was mostly empty, with just a few customers scattered around. I walked in and ordered 20 skewers of grilled kidneys before finding a quiet corner. It was my absolute favorite comfort food. I had carried this habit over from my previous life, and it was the best way to celebrate a good day. I was happily devouring the food and washing it down with a soda when I heard a soft voice behind me. I had just taken a massive bite of the perfectly seasoned meat. The girl commented that my slaps earlier were perfectly symmetrical and impressive. I turned around to see a girl in the Northwood uniform standing there with an air of effortless grace. She was stunning with flawless skin and a striking figure that made the standard school uniform look like designer clothing. I gestured with my skewer and asked if she was actually talking to me. She nodded with a bright and curious look in her eyes. I just looked away and told her I didn't have a clue who she was. The girl looked taken aback and stopped halfway into her seat. Just then, my phone started buzzing with a call from my driver. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door without another word. She watched me leave as if she wanted to say something else, but she kept her mouth shut. I had no interest in playing games with some random schoolgirl. When I got home, my mother was already waiting to scream at me before I could even take off my shoes. She demanded to know if I had lost all respect for authority and why I was airing our family's dirty laundry at school. I remained completely calm because I had expected this exact reaction from her. I neatly placed my shoes in the closet and slowly looked up at her. Her face was red with anger, but I didn't feel a single spark of guilt. Even though she was getting older, she still possessed the kind of beauty that had once captivated my father. It was easy to see why he had defied his parents, the senior Harrisons, just to marry her. Sadly, she was the biggest mistake of his entire life, though he never lived to realize it. My father died, never knowing that she had a secret son with another man long before they met. She had hidden Ethan away for years, sending him money behind my father's back. I walked past her and took a seat on the sofa, asking her if she really expected me to let her love child walk all over me in my own home. Her hysterical screaming stopped instantly as she bit her lip. She tried to tell me that Ethan was my brother and that he was family. She claimed she was just planning on moving him in soon and accused me of overreacting to the whole situation. She made it sound like everything was my fault. I laughed and told her I didn't make a habit of claiming strangers as my siblings. I reminded her that this estate belonged to the Harrison family, not her Montgomery relatives. I told her that if there were real problems, my grandparents would handle me, so she could stop the theatrics. My voice was steady, but I knew my words were cutting deep. The Montgomerys were nobodies, and the only reason she had a life of luxury was because of the Harrison family's wealth. Her own business had failed years ago and left her with nothing. She had been living off the dividends from my shares in the Harrison Group for a long time. Even the very house we were standing in was legally registered in my name, not hers. Her face darkened as she snapped at me, asking if this was how I intended to speak to my mother. She started cursing the day I was born and claimed that every member of the Harrison family was exactly the same. She grew more furious by the second and looked like she wanted to tear the house down. She grabbed a decorative rod from the table, clearly intending to strike me. I just slowly rolled my shoulders and stared at her with a cold, unmoving expression. Helen, the housekeeper, finally stepped in to try and de-escalate the situation. She warned my mother that getting this angry wasn't good for her health. She also pointed out that they would have to answer to my grandfather if anything happened to me. Helen had been placed in the house by my grandfather to keep an eye on things. As the sole heir to the Harrison fortune, I was a protected asset. I gave my mother a small smile and suggested she calm down while I went to my room to recover from the exhaustion of her shouting. I took one last look at her before leaving, noticing she looked like she was about to blow a fuse. Dealing with her was always mentally draining because of her constant drama. Helen told me later that as soon as I went upstairs, my mother got a call from Ethan. She took all the rage she couldn't vent on me and unleashed it on him instead. She spent 2 hours screaming at him over the phone. It was an unexpected turn of events, but knowing that the golden boy was being berated made me feel great. I headed back to Northwood Academy the next day and immediately noticed the atmosphere had shifted. This was the most elite prep school in the country, filled with children of the wealthiest and most powerful families. Everyone was staring at me with a new kind of intensity. I was probably the first student in the school's history to publicly announce a family scandal like an illegitimate sibling. The moment I walked into the classroom, every head turned to look at me. A voice from the back of the room mocked me, saying they would have dropped out by now if they were in my shoes. The 2 guys in the back were trying to stir up trouble, but nobody else was joining in. It made them look desperate and loud for no reason. I gave them a cold look and realized they were just Ethan's little lackeys. I smiled and agreed with them, noting how close they usually were with Ethan. I asked if they were finally admitting that they couldn't stand having a bastard in our school. They both went quiet, completely stunned and unable to find a comeback. One of them stammered out a weak response, so I told him to shut up if he didn't have a brain. I reached out and delivered 2 quick slaps to Ethan's face, hitting the exact same spots I had bruised the day before. I casually brushed off my hands afterward. I told him his turn was over and that he could go back to his seat now. Ethan stared at me in total disbelief, as if he couldn't process what had just happened. The rest of the class was just as shocked because I wasn't following the villain script they expected. Ethan's 2 friends had gone completely silent, terrified to say another word. They knew that bothering me could lead to serious problems for their parents' businesses. Ethan kept his head down, acting like he hadn't heard a thing. He put on his typical victim routine and told me in a soft voice that I could hit him as much as I wanted if it meant we could be brothers again. I let out a cold laugh and raised my hand as if I was going to hit him a 3rd time. Before I could strike, a girl's voice screamed at me to stop. It was Ava Sterling, my fiancée. She rushed over to Ethan's side and grabbed his arm while giving me a look of pure hatred. She looked at the marks on Ethan's face and her eyes welled up with tears immediately. Ethan put on a heroic front and pulled her into a comforting hug, telling her that he was okay. I just stood there in total silence, disgusted by the drama. Everyone who had seen the assembly yesterday knew that Ethan was my half-brother. Seeing him embrace my fiancée in front of the entire class was like watching a bad soap opera. The whole situation was incredibly twisted and wrong. The rest of the class was starting to look at Ethan and Ava with a mix of confusion and contempt. Ava, who usually acted like she was above everyone else, looked at me with a dark expression and told me I should just learn to forgive him. She shot me another look of disgust. At that point, my friend David couldn't take it anymore. He slammed his hand down on his desk and asked Ava if she had completely lost her mind. He told her that everyone in the room thought she looked like Ethan's fiancée instead of mine. He openly wondered why I ever bothered with her in the first place. He finished by saying that if he were me, he would have dumped her a long time ago. There were things I couldn't say myself because of the family drama, but I had no problem letting my friend speak for me. David told her he never liked her and accused her of living in a fantasy world. He called Ethan a loser who only knew how to manipulate her with sweet talk. He told her that her father would be livid if he knew she was hanging out with someone as pathetic as Ethan. I looked at David while he was on a roll and casually handed him my water bottle. I wanted him to keep going without getting a parched throat. Ava had never been humiliated like this in public, and she looked absolutely stunned. She was trembling with rage as she turned to me and asked if I agreed with David. I just smirked and asked her what else she expected me to think. I waved her off and told her she should take some time to remember who her actual fiancé was. I told her to come back to me when she had a clear answer. She was speechless as I turned my back on her and walked up to the front of the classroom. I announced to the whole class that nobody should even think about telling me to be the bigger person. I warned them that if they did, I might just go out and find a few illegitimate children for their families to deal with too. I added a fake apology in case David had offended anyone with his honesty. Then I looked directly at Ethan and Ava and raised my voice. I made it clear that David was under my protection and that anyone who targeted him would have to deal with me. David Miller was one of the few people I could actually trust in this twisted story. In the original plot, I was the main villain and he was just a sidekick meant to be discarded. Now, he was the only person I considered an actual ally in this mess. Ethan was surprisingly quiet for the next week and didn't try any of his usual tricks. By Friday afternoon, I was finally able to relax a bit. David and I were in the middle of a gaming session when things took another turn. My phone rang, and it was Helen calling from the house. She sounded frantic and angry as she told me I needed to get home immediately because something had happened. I took off my headset and tried to calm her down so she could tell me what was going on. She told me that my mother had actually brought Ethan to the house with all of his luggage. I was stunned for a moment because I thought she had finally dropped the idea of moving him in. It turned out she was just waiting for a chance to do it behind my back. I told Helen to stay calm and that I would handle everything once I got home. She kept telling me not to lose my cool, but I wasn't nearly as upset as she thought. Getting angry at a woman like my mother was just a waste of energy. I preferred spending money on things that actually made me happy. David had heard the entire conversation and was shocked by how shameless some people could be. I was much more composed than him about the whole situation. I decided it was better to make the people bothering me miserable instead of being miserable myself. I told David to forget about it, and that dinner was on me. I said we needed some good food to wash away the bad vibes from the day. I was a firm believer that a good meal could fix almost anything. I patted David on the shoulder and dragged him toward the grill shack. When we arrived, we saw two very familiar faces standing near the entrance. It was the stunning girl I had met at the school gate and my supposed fiancée, Ava Sterling. I didn't particularly care for either of them, but they were both undeniably beautiful and hard to miss. They were locked in a tense standoff, glaring at each other with pure hatred. It looked like a fight was about to break out at any second. David noticed them too and asked why the new transfer student was arguing with Ava. It clicked for me then that she was Willow Sterling, the former child star everyone had been talking about. She was known as the nation's sweetheart, and she had clearly wasted no time in challenging Ava's authority at school. She certainly had some nerve, which I found entertaining. I grabbed my order of skewers and pulled David to a table with a perfect view of the drama. I couldn't hear their conversation, but seeing Ava's face turn red with anger made my night. The show ended too soon when Ava finally stormed off in a huff. Willow stood there alone for a moment before turning to leave. As she walked past our table, she gave me a long, lingering look as if she was trying to memorize my face. I didn't want to waste time wondering about her motives, so I just waited to see what she would do next. When I got back to the house, I saw my mother arguing with several police officers. Ethan was standing nearby with his bags, looking like a kicked puppy and not saying a word. The neighborhood staff were all peeking out of their windows, eager for some high society gossip. I knew they lived for this kind of drama. My mother was screaming at the officers, demanding to know why her own son was being accused of trespassing. The officer looked uncomfortable as he explained that the legal owner of the house had called in the report. He told Mrs. Montgomery that there wasn't much he could do. My mother was about to keep arguing when Ethan spotted my car and called out to me like I was his savior. His shout drew everyone's attention to me, so I had no choice but to get out of the car. My mother immediately demanded that I tell the police Ethan was my brother. She sounded absolutely furious that I had actually called the cops on them. Ethan looked terrified when our eyes met and stayed close to my mother with a nervous smile. I walked past her and went straight to the officers, informing them that I was the one who had called. I made it clear that I was the sole owner of the house and that Ethan was there without my permission. I knew that following legal procedures was more effective than any argument. Besides, humiliating them in front of the neighbors was the best part. The officers looked back at my mother as she continued to scream, unable to believe I was actually going through with it. She asked me if I had any respect for her and told me to stop making such a scene. I looked her in the eye and repeated her words back to her. In the past, I had kept my mouth shut out of respect, but those days were officially over. I told her very calmly that I wasn't going to make things difficult for her. She looked relieved for a split second before I finished my sentence. I told her that since she wanted to be with Ethan so much, she could pack her bags and move out with him. Helen didn't miss a beat and headed inside to start packing, moving faster than I'd ever seen her. My mother stood there in total shock, reminding me that she was my mother. I just told her that she was Ethan's mother too, which effectively ended the conversation. The entire drama ended with my mother and Ethan leaving the estate. I watched from my car as Ethan followed her out with a pathetic, wounded expression. He actually thought that taking away my family and my fiancée was the way to defeat me. He was as delusional as he was stupid. The real show was only just beginning. Later that night, David sent me a screenshot of an Instagram post Ethan had just shared. He had captioned a photo of a new house with a comment about it being their new family home. The photo showed him and my mother smiling in front of a house with a very specific interior style. I felt a wave of relief when I realized it wasn't the house I was thinking of. If they had moved there, my next plan wouldn't have worked as well. My grandfather was thrilled when he heard that I had kicked them out of the house. He told me I was finally starting to act like a true Harrison. He always believed that staying true to your principles was more important than letting messy emotions dictate your life. My grandmother was even more excited and ordered a massive feast to celebrate what she called my new beginning. It was then that I realized just how much my grandparents had always disliked my mother. I spent the next several days staying at the Harrison family estate. I spent my days listening to my grandfather's stories about his business empire and my evenings helping my grandmother in the garden. It was a simple and peaceful life. Meanwhile, Ethan was busy posting photos of luxury cars and watches on Facebook, trying his hardest to look like a millionaire. It was obvious who was funding his lifestyle. I treated it all as a joke and even made bets with my grandmother about how long he would be able to keep up the act. The weekend flew by, and I eventually had to return to the reality of being a high school senior. Back at school, Ethan was back to his old tricks, constantly trying to impress Ava. He was always picking her up in his new car and acting like a concerned gentleman. He kept telling her he was worried about her safety, which was such an obvious act. Ava's reaction was different this time around. No matter how hard Ethan tried to win her over, she remained cold and distant toward him. Instead, she kept trying to strike up conversations with me, but I made sure to avoid her at all costs. David was confused by her behavior and asked me if I thought she was trying to get back together with me. I just smirked and told him that she was probably just impressed by the speech he had given the other day. David looked incredibly proud of himself and promised to give her another talking to the next time he had the chance. I didn't have the heart to tell him that he was completely wrong about her motivations. Ava hadn't suddenly grown a conscience or become afraid of David. She was just feeling the pressure of no longer having me as her loyal servant. My grandparents had given me some very interesting information about the Sterling family while I was staying with them. It turned out her father had recently brought home an illegitimate daughter. Usually, an outsider wouldn't be much of a threat to a girl like Ava. However, this girl was smart, sophisticated, and perfectly behaved, which made Ava look bad in comparison. Compared to this new girl, Ava looked like a spoiled and undisciplined child. She was desperate to hold on to me because I was the heir to the Harrison fortune. Marrying me was the only way she could secure her future and maintain her status in high society. Marrying into my family was her only shot at keeping her lifestyle. She was stuck in a difficult position, torn between her feelings for Ethan and the security I could provide. She knew that a marriage with me would guarantee her future forever. I knew Ava would change her tune, but I didn't expect things to get this weird. She approached my desk during lunch one day with a bag of food and told me she had heard I liked grilled meat. She offered some to me and David in the sweetest voice she could manage. I almost laughed because there wasn't a single kidney skewer in the bag. David saw Ethan trailing behind her like a lost puppy and immediately said he wasn't interested. He leaned in and whispered that I shouldn't take the food either. Ethan looked uncomfortable, but quickly tried to play the role of the gallant protector. He told us that Ava had gone out of her way to buy the food for us. The entire classroom went silent as everyone watched the confrontation unfold. Ava wasn't used to being rejected, and she looked humiliated. She seemed even more annoyed by Ethan's intervention. She pushed the bag closer to me and asked if I was seriously going to turn her down. Ethan told me to be more of an adult and just accept the gift. I might have actually taken it if he hadn't been standing there like a loyal bodyguard. His presence made the whole thing unbearable. Legally, she was still my fiancée, so I could have accepted the food just to be polite. However, seeing Ethan hovering over her was more than I could stand. I had no intention of making things easy for them. I stood up with a cold smirk and walked toward Ava as if I was going to take the bag. She looked relieved, and Ethan had a smug look on his face as if he had won. They both thought I was finally giving in. My fingers had just brushed the bag when a voice from the door called out that only an idiot would eat anything Ava bought. It was Willow Sterling, and her voice was full of confidence. I couldn't help but feel a little amused by the timing. Everyone turned to see Willow walking into the room with a massive bag of food. It looked like she had brought enough kidney skewers to feed the entire class. She walked in with total confidence, and the atmosphere in the room immediately shifted. The guys in the class started whispering about her being the famous transfer student and how incredible she looked. Ava's face turned beet red the second she saw her, and she gripped her bag of food so hard her knuckles turned white. Willow completely ignored Ava and walked right past her to my desk. She handed me the bag of skewers and gave me a sweet smile, telling me she knew they were my favorite. She looked like she was enjoying every second of the drama. I took a moment to study her, because the original James never had anything to do with Willow. I knew that a girl like her didn't do anything without a reason. I had to figure out if she was actually interested in me, or if she was just using me for something else. David kept looking back and forth between the two of them with a confused expression. Ava was practically shaking with rage as she shouted at Willow that she was my fiancée. She looked like she was ready to snap at any second. Ava stomped her foot and tried to mark her territory, but Willow just gave her a mocking smile. Willow told her that her status as my fiancée probably wouldn't last much longer. That was the final straw for Ava, who lunged forward and slapped Willow across the face. Willow didn't hesitate and immediately grabbed Ava's hair and pulled her down. The two of them were soon rolling around on the floor in a full-blown catfight. It was a spoiled socialite against a rising star, and every guy in the room was completely mesmerized by the chaos. I had no interest in stopping the fight, so I just grabbed David and moved to a safe corner to enjoy the show. By the time someone finally stepped in to break them up, both of them were a complete mess. Ava definitely looked like she had taken the brunt of the damage. I couldn't believe how much drama Ava had created over a bag of food. Ethan finally snapped out of his shock and rushed over to her side like a hero. He pulled her into his arms and tried to comfort her while she sobbed. He held a crying Ava in his arms and started shouting accusations at me. It was clear that I was his real target, not Willow. He accused me of being a terrible person and claimed I was working with some other woman to bully my own fiancée. His accusations were absolutely ridiculous and completely untrue. I gave him a cold smile and asked if he actually wanted to see what real bullying looked like. I walked right up to him and kicked him hard in the stomach without saying another word. Ethan went flying backward and hit the floor with a heavy thud. I told him that was what real bullying felt like. Ava looked like she was about to start screaming in his defense, so I decided to give her a taste of the same treatment. I kicked Ava as well, giving her the same treatment I'd given Ethan. Willow let out a small laugh and commented that the Harrison family was surprisingly good with their feet as well as their hands. I just rubbed my forehead in frustration, feeling like I was stuck in the middle of a complete disaster. It probably wasn't the smartest move to get physically involved, but it felt good at the time. As I expected, Ava and Ethan were both hauled into the dean's office and forced to write formal apologies for their behavior. I didn't find out why Willow was so obsessed with me and Ava until my 18th birthday party. My grandfather had thrown a massive, extravagant celebration at the Harrison estate. Every important person in the city had shown up to pay their respects to our family. I was in the middle of a conversation with Mr. Sterling when I heard someone call him Dad. I turned to see Willow standing there. Mr. Sterling was Ava's father, which made Willow his illegitimate daughter. I kept a polite smile on my face, but my mind was racing as I processed the news. I looked at Willow with a new sense of suspicion. She was clearly Sterling's secret daughter, and her presence at such a high-profile event was no accident. Someone was definitely pulling the strings behind the scenes to make this happen. After making the rounds with my grandfather, I managed to sneak away to the garden for some air. Dealing with all those business moguls was exhausting because I had to be so careful with everything I said. One wrong word could lead to a disastrous business deal. I heard someone approaching and asked them what they wanted without even turning around. I was tired and my voice was full of irritation. Willow didn't seem to care that she was intruding on my quiet moment. She pointed out that neither Ava nor my mother had shown up for my birthday party. I just shrugged and told her I didn't care. I already knew that Ethan had probably faked some illness to keep them both away from the celebration. My mother and Ava were clearly too busy playing nurse to Ethan to bother with me. It didn't matter though, because every important person in the city was already here for the Harrisons. Their presence meant much more than a couple of family members. The party was actually more enjoyable without their drama. I felt like the air was finally clear. Willow sat down beside me and told me she actually liked me, leaning in close as she spoke. Her playful tone had vanished, replaced by something much more serious. I immediately told her I wasn't interested. I made it clear that I had no time for illegitimate children and their power games. I told her she was wasting her time trying to manipulate me. I told her that the Sterling family's problems were none of my business and I wouldn't be getting involved. I knew exactly what she was trying to do. She wanted me as an ally to help her take down Ava. She wanted to replace Ava and become my new fiancé. Her smile faded when I turned her down, but she kept pushing. She asked me if I was really going to let Ethan and Ava get away with everything they had done. She was trying to get a reaction out of me, but I wasn't going to give her what she wanted. I stood up to leave and told her I would handle Ethan and Ava on my own terms. I warned her to stop trying to use me for her own agenda. I told her that if she tried to drag me into her family's mess, I might just end up turning on her. She looked shocked for a second before putting her smile back on and telling me I was being dramatic. I was done talking to her and decided to head back to my party. As the guest of honor, I couldn't be missing for too long. I walked away without looking back, leaving Willow to do whatever she wanted. After the party, Ethan started his fake apology routine again, flooding my phone with iMessages. He claimed he was solely responsible for my mother and Ava missing the party, and told me I should only be mad at him. He kept repeating that everything was his fault in every single message. It was clear he was trying to play the martyr and make himself look like a saint. His constant whining only made me more determined to give him the gift I had planned for his birthday. I decided it would be a shame not to reward his sacrifice with something truly special. As his birthday approached, he sent out an invite on our class's Facebook group, inviting everyone to a massive party at his house. He made sure to tag Ava in the post and practically begged her to come. She felt obligated to accept, of course. I knew that the real reason for the public invitation was to see if I would show up. Ava had become more confident because I hadn't made a scene about her spending time with Ethan. She probably thought that since I hadn't publicly dumped her yet, I never would. She assumed her place as a future Harrison was safe. I hadn't said anything bad about her to our families, which only bolstered her confidence. On the day of Ethan's party, he started posting photos of the expensive decorations, luxury gifts, and rare wines he'd received. I couldn't help but smile when I saw them. The more he bragged about his wealth, the harder he was going to fall. I was genuinely looking forward to seeing his perfect world come crashing down. When I turned my phone back on the next morning, I had over 100 notifications waiting for me. I had messages from my mother, Ava, and David all fighting for my attention. I almost missed David's messages in the chaos. I scrolled through the chat and felt a surge of satisfaction before getting into my car and heading to school. David was waiting for me at the classroom door and looked like he was about to burst with excitement. He told me I wouldn't believe what had happened at Ethan's party. He was so animated that he was practically shouting as he told the story. He said a group of massive guys in black suits and sunglasses had shown up at the party. They announced that the house had been sold to their boss and that everyone had to leave immediately. It sounded like a scene from a movie. David laughed as he described the look on Ethan's face when the party was shut down. I looked over at Ethan, who was slumped at his desk looking like his world had ended. It seemed like my little birthday surprise had been a huge success. Ava finally stormed over and demanded to know why I had done it. She claimed that missing my party was just a misunderstanding and accused me of being petty and ungentlemanly. She was clearly livid on Ethan's behalf. She started lecturing me like she was some kind of moral authority. It was ridiculous considering she wasn't even involved in the situation. Ethan looked up and gave me a hateful glare while she was shouting at me. I actually enjoyed seeing them so upset because their misery was my gain. The house they were living in had been bought by my father years ago, and I had inherited it after his death. It was legally mine to do with as I pleased. I had simply decided to sell the property and given the buyer a massive discount for a quick closing. I viewed it as a small act of justice. I didn't feel the need to explain the details of the transaction to them. I calmly told Miss Sterling to watch her mouth. I explained that I had every right to sell my property and wasn't responsible for when a new owner decided to take possession. I even acted surprised that anyone was living there without my permission. I didn't even look her in the eye while I was talking. Ava was speechless and clearly had no comeback for my logic. She just glared at me with tearful eyes for a moment before running back to comfort Ethan. I just shook my head as I watched her comfort him. I was genuinely curious to see how long her loyalty to him would last once things really started to get bad. Over the next month, I watched as Ethan's world continued to fall apart. He went from driving a high-end car to riding a beat-up bicycle to school every day. I knew that it wouldn't be long before my mother came crawling back to me for help. I wasn't surprised when I found her waiting for me on the living room sofa a few days later. She gave me a rare, fake smile and asked how my studies were going. She told me not to stress too much about the upcoming exams. She was clearly trying to be on my good side before asking for something. Her sudden concern for my well-being was almost comical. I decided to play along and told her my studies were fine, but that things were difficult because my grandparents were in control of my inheritance. I wanted her to know that I didn't have easy access to cash. I reminded her that I was a big spender and that I was currently out of cash. The question she was about to ask died in her throat as she realized I wouldn't be able to help her. She had spent years living as a wealthy socialite without developing any actual life skills. Her pride was the only thing she had left, so she couldn't bring herself to beg for money once I'd made my position clear. She knew I was lying about the cash, but she was too vain to call me out on it. Her own business was on the verge of total collapse. She had lost everything on a bad tech investment, and her company's finances were a disaster. I was sure she and Ethan had already sold off anything of value just to keep the lights on. They were struggling just to pay their employees' salaries at this point. She finally gave up on me and started looking for other options. When I got to school the next day, I could tell from the looks on Ava and Ethan's faces that something was very wrong. They both looked like they hadn't slept in days. Everyone in class was already whispering about the cracks in their relationship. Ava had never known a life without luxury, and she wasn't the type to choose love over money. For her, love was only worth it if it came with a massive bank account and high social status. Since my mother couldn't get any money from me, she turned her sights on Ethan and Ava. She actually told Ethan to go and beg Ava to ask her father for a bailout. She was hoping the Sterling family would step in and save her failing business. Ava was already under enough pressure because of Willow's presence in her family. She was terrified of losing her own inheritance and wasn't about to risk her father's anger by asking for money. Her relationship with Ethan was strained to the breaking point. They were hanging on by a thread, and I knew it wouldn't take much to finish them off. I decided it was the perfect time for me to intervene. I gathered all the photos I had of Ava and Ethan together and gave them to my grandfather. My grandfather didn't say a word as he looked through the photos. He took them straight to Mr. Sterling that afternoon to clear things up. He told me later that Ava's father had been absolutely livid when he saw the evidence of her affair with Ethan. Mr. Sterling was a veteran businessman, and he knew exactly how to handle a scandal. He had already lost some ground to my grandfather in a previous business deal, and now he had to make amends for his daughter's behavior. It was time for the Sterlings to pay up. Mr. Sterling decided the best way to handle the mess was to call off our engagement immediately. I was more than happy to be free of Ava. While I was celebrating my freedom, others were starting to panic about their futures. Ethan must have heard the news from my mother. He came to school the next day, looking like a completely new person, his depression gone. He actually had the nerve to pat me on the shoulder and tell me not to worry about the breakup. He said it was for the best since Ava and I never really loved each other anyway. I agreed with him completely, but I decided to pretend to be devastated just to see what would happen. When Ava walked into the room, I put on my best performance of a heartbroken fiancé. I wanted to see how she would react to my grief. Ethan walked over to her with a smug grin and put his arm around her. He looked like he had finally won the grand prize. He seemed to have forgotten all the drama and humiliation he'd been through lately. Ava looked terrible, her face pale and drawn. She gave me a look filled with guilt and confusion before pushing Ethan's hand away. She approached me and asked why I had gone to so much trouble to call off our wedding. I didn't say a word and just kept my eyes fixed on Ethan. My silence made her think that I was waiting for her to make a move. She actually believed I was giving her a chance to explain herself and win me back. She thought that if she dumped Ethan, I would take her back and everything would be fine. After a long silence, she finally told me that she didn't actually love Ethan. She claimed she had always just seen him as a brother. It was clear she had spent all night coming up with that lie to save her social status. She valued her wealth and lifestyle far more than any feeling she had for Ethan. She was terrified of losing everything and decided that being with me was her only way out. Ethan's smug grin vanished instantly as he stared at her in shock. He grabbed her arm and demanded to know what she was talking about. He reminded her that she had already promised to marry him and had accepted his proposal. I gave her a look of pure disappointment, which pushed her to double down on her lie. She pulled away from Ethan and told him she had never agreed to marry him. She repeated her lie about seeing him as a brother and apologized for any misunderstanding she might have caused. Ethan was shaking with rage and humiliation as he realized she was dumping him in front of the whole class. He looked like he had been physically struck. I wanted to applaud her performance because it had accomplished exactly what I wanted. I couldn't help but let a small smile slip. I told him not to take it too personally and repeated his own words back to him. I said it was better to be honest about their lack of real feelings. Ethan looked like he was about to pass out before collapsing into his chair. A few students eventually helped Ethan to the nurse's office while Ava stayed behind to focus on me. She didn't even look at him as he was being carried away. She told me that everything had been a misunderstanding and promised to visit my family soon to set things right. She asked if our engagement was back on, which made me scoff. I asked her what she was thinking if she actually believed I would still marry her. My fake sadness was gone, replaced by a look of pure contempt. I reminded her that I was a Harrison and that I would always have plenty of options for a wife. I asked her why she thought she was so special that I couldn't live without her. I made sure my voice was loud enough for everyone to hear my rejection. Ava stood there in stunned silence as her eyes filled with tears. She didn't say another word before turning and running out of the room. She tried to crawl back to Ethan in the days that followed, desperate to save some part of her old life. It was obvious to everyone that their relationship was over. They spent all their time fighting and eventually just gave up on each other. Neither of them was able to focus on their studies, and they both failed their final exams. My mother's business went bankrupt just as summer started. She began showing up at my house every day, trying to act like a loving mother, so I would bail her out. I knew exactly what she was doing, and I had no intention of helping her. Ethan's grades were so bad that he couldn't even get into a decent university and had to settle for a local community college. Ava's scores were even worse, and she ended up with a lower ranking than Willow. It was a complete disaster for both of them. Mr. Sterling was so embarrassed by his daughter's failure that he sent her away to a school in Europe. Everyone knew it was just a way to get her out of the family's life for good. By the time she returned, she would be completely cut off from a sterling fortune. I graduated from college a few years later and officially joined the family business. I often thought back to those high school days and felt incredibly lucky that I had chosen a different path. I had saved myself from a lifetime of misery. I learned that you don't have to follow the role society gives you. Even if you start out as a side character, you can still take control and write your own story. I was living proof that you can move past the drama and build a life worth living. James found himself transported into a novel as the villain who was destined to be hated by everyone. Every single person who betrayed him ended up suffering the consequences of their own toxic choices. The script of life is never truly set in stone. Even if the world casts you as a minor character, you still have the power to hold your head high and forge your own path. James won because he refused to accept the miserable fate handed to him from the very start. It doesn't matter how others try to write your story because you're the only author of your own life.